son built my son a car.
How much for the boy? Where's like
Okay, can I have a motion to reconvene into open session? Mrs. Weiss, seconded by Mrs. Mamalito, all in favor? 3-1. 3-0, sorry. I need to go back to math. Let's please rise for the pledge.
Allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Good evening, everyone. Good evening. For the record, I would like to notify the members of the board, administration, and community members that I am in receipt of a letter of resignation from the board from Mrs. Julia Freed, dated August 12, 2019.
So that said, and we'll make some comments shortly about that. But because there is a vacancy on both the board who joins us tonight for guidance on both filling the presidency and filling the vacancy on the board. So we asked Mr. Block to join us tonight to advise the board and the community of actions that should be taken after such a resignation. Mr. Block.
So first we'll address the vacancy on the board, and then we'll address the vacancy in the office of president. When there's a member on the board who resigns or is no longer serving on the board and creates a vacancy, the board has three options. The first option is the board can simply do nothing and just wait until the next election, and then that individual's seat would be up. In this particular case, Ms. Freed had 1 year left on her term, so her term expires on June 30th. So if the board did not make any appointment, then there would be an election, and the individual would be elected effective on the day of the election, and then for the next potentially 3 years. The board can also hold a special election in which it can be convened, and there would be an election like there is in your annual election, except it would just be for this one office. That is sort of something that, while it's at the board's option, doesn't really make much sense when you're looking at a term which is already expiring in the same year in which the individual is stepping down. That may be more probable if you have a multi-year term left, because you're dealing with, again, a short term, you're dealing with expense in terms of holding that election. And the third process, which is typically the most common process that you'll see implemented, is the board will appoint somebody to fill that position until the next annual election. This year, I think the election is May 19th, 2020. So the board makes an appointment of an individual. There is no particular criteria or there is no particular process with respect to making that appointment, who that individual would be being appointed. It's completely within the board's discretion to be able to identify that person and determine how to go about filling that vacancy. If that appointment is made, the individual has 30 days to take the oath of office, and then would serve on the board until the election on May 19th, 2020, and again, at which point Julia's term of office would just go on the ballot, as it would have been if she was still serving on the board. So that's the situation with respect to filling the office. With respect to filling the board seat, we have currently Ms. Marcus was the vice president, and under the educational law, section 1701, the vice president will serve in the absence of the president, and that occurs until the next reorganization meeting, which is usually the first Tuesday in July. It's sort of, in case of a vacancy, it's sort of similar to the President of the United States, where the President abdicates the office and the Vice President ends up being sworn in. We also have a board policy 2220, which pretty much states the same thing, that the Vice President serves in the absence of the President. By doing that, then that creates a vacancy in the office of Vice President. And a school board is not required to have a Vice President, but it's very good practice to have that, and you'll see that probably all the school boards in the state of New York will have a Vice President. One of the rationales is this particular situation that we have right now. We had a president who had to step aside. We do have a board policy that states that the board will appoint at reorganization meeting a vice president, and we did do that this past reorganization meeting. But now there's a need to be able to appoint a new vice president, because Ms. Marcus, by operation of law, automatically elevates to be president of the board. So now the board would have to appoint someone to replace her. The policy that we have does state that that vice president gets elected at the reorganization meeting. So if the board were to pursue appointing a president, we would have to make a motion to suspend our current policy so we can appoint that vice president to the office of presidency at this point in time, which is other than a reorganization meeting. That's it in a nutshell.
Right, now the district clerk will give the oath.
If I may, and congratulations to Mrs. Marcus. At the reorganizational meeting, we also held a swearing-in ceremony for Mrs. Weiss, who was recently re-elected to the board for a 3-year term. But we didn't have our representative from Syntax here that night to document it, so we're just going to stage a second oath of office, if you don't mind.
Take oath.
You can say it again if you'd like.
I do solemnly swear that I will support the Constitution of the United States and the Constitution of the State of New York, and that I will faithfully discharge the duties of the office of a member of the Board of Education according to the best of my abilities. Okay, thank you.
I do have some comments regarding Mrs. Freed's resignation that I think are very appropriate. It is with a heavy heart that I accept the role of president. Obviously, this expectation for this year was for me to serve as vice president with Mrs. Freed as president. We are sorry to lose Julia from our board. We will miss not just her leadership, but her spunk and her humor that she would bring to every meeting, public and private. Julia has served not just this board, but the entire community of Elwood very well, far beyond just her 5 years as a Board of Education member, with dedication and always the best of intentions, routinely saying, I'm trying to say it in her voice, it's all about the kids. Whenever we had any remote small conflict, she would always throw that in, which I think for all of us, it is always about the kids, so no arguing with that comment. constantly. As a board, we wish her the absolute best, and our thoughts are with her and her family. And everyone watching, including Julia, if she's watching us now, she can all be confident that we as a board will wholeheartedly continue to focus on providing the best education to our community's most precious resource, which are the students that fill the classroom, so the kids. Does anybody else have any comments that they would like to add?
I don't, I think what you said was well said.
Great, just we're sending our prayers to Julia and her family. Thank you.
I have 2 comments. Tomorrow, every member of the community will receive a letter, which will summarize what just occurred and what will about to be moved upon by the board in the next motion, so that the community is well aware of the situation of Mrs. Reed stepping down and subsequent actions taken by the board under the advice of council. So that's the formal letter that will go home tomorrow. On a personal note, I thank the board for their diligence in formulating a plan that will help district operations to continue without any interruption. And secondly, I would be remiss if I did not publicly express my gratitude to Julia. Her service on the board has overlapped with my tenure. Her involvement in the community certainly extends well beyond that. But in the 3 years I had the pleasure of working with Mrs. Freed, she was supportive, she was kind, she was passionate, and she absolutely focused her attention on making decisions in the best interest of our students. And I will miss working with her in that capacity. But as she enters the field of residence, I know she won't be disappointed to be home with her family on Thursday nights rather than seated at the table with all of us. But as I'm rather sure Julia will watch this at some point or another, I do want to express my gratitude to her in helping to bring me to Elwood and working so closely together in the best interest of our students during the time.
Now I would like to follow up with what Mr. Block said and have a motion for the following. To appoint Michael Lamena to serve as a member of the Board of Education, filling the vacancy caused by the resignation of Julia Freed, to serve until the annual election of board members on May 19th, 2020. Can I have a motion? Mrs. Mamalito, seconded by Mrs. Weiss. All in favor? 3-0. Congratulations to Mr. Lamena. I'm going to give Dr. Bosser a moment to speak.
Well, first of all, I'd like to express my gratitude for Mr. Lamena, and I look forward to working with him again. He was an outstanding board member in the past, and I'm sure he will be in the future. A point of clarity, Mr. Block expressed it, but I want to make sure it's documented carefully for the public. Mr. Lamena's term will expire the date of the next election, which this year is May 19th, which means he will serve only until that day, unless he seeks re-election and is voted into the seat by the community. It's important to note that because it's very often misunderstood that he's being appointed for a school year. The statute and law calls for him to only serve in the position until the next election. He can opt to be part of that election process if he so chooses, but his term as appointed by the board ends the 9th of the vote, when the next person is elected. And whoever that leading vote getter is that evening, whether it was Mr. Lemon or someone else, would take the seat immediately for a board meeting that would be convened to accept the results of the vote, which is just an interesting New York State statute that's important to understand in this circumstances. Rare for Elwood, but this type of position that the board is in where a board member who resigns with time left on the term is not really uncommon. It just hasn't happened here recently. Any questions from the board on that issue?
I wanted to give comments. I thought it would be appropriate, because like Dr. Brossart said, this is not a common thing, at least definitely not in our district, to explain the process that we went through as a board in choosing Mr. Lamena. One thing that we all agreed upon very quickly was that we were not going to hold a special election because it was such a short term. We weren't going to waste district funds when an election is going to happen in May of 2020, which is, for most of us in the school mindset, is this year. So that was one thing. And then as Mr. Block explained, really the option for appointment is wide open. So once we decided that we did not want to remain a small 4-person board, we had to figure out how we were going to appoint someone. I want the community to know that we had a very thorough and what I thought was a very thoughtful conversation and debate about the process of doing that, even individual people. And what we ended up with was asking Mr. Michael Lamena to join us this year. Mr. Lamena is a twice elected and widely respected board member, serving in both the offices of president and vice president during his tenure. Mr. Lamena is an engaged parent with 3 children enrolled in our schools. Most importantly, given our special circumstances, Mr. Lamena brings an instantaneous knowledge of board functioning and school governance with him, enabling him to hit the ground running as he fills this vacancy for just this year. That is especially helpful to us since we lost our most senior member. Mr. Lamena also brings a financial acumen to our board that will prove helpful in budget discussions this year. And lastly, his prior service as a board member means that we, this is a small point, but we as a district do not have to spend money on his new board member training, which we would have had done if it was not a prior member, for just 8 months. So I do know, I feel like everyone was heard and respected in the process, and I appreciated that. And I know that we all here appreciate his willingness to come back and serve the community in this way again under these special circumstances. Does anybody else have a comment?
If I may. Just for a point of clarity for the community, the board is permitted to discuss vacancies inclusive of a personnel action that involves the Board of Education in the executive session. And I would hate to think that anyone present or anyone that may be watching our meeting later feel that the board made a quick decision about appointing Mr. Lamena. I can assure you, having been present with council and the board, that this decision was reached after lengthy conversation, lengthy analysis, and really considering all factors and all available options before entering into this decision. So I want to compliment the board on the effort that you placed into doing what you feel is in the best interest of the school district, and I join the board in being thankful that Mr. Lamena has made his time available to our community.
So thank you, Mr. Lamena. Now I would like to have a motion to postpone the nomination and election of the vice president, which is items G1 through 3, until the next board meeting on September 5th, 2019. Mrs. Mamalito made the motion, seconded by Mrs. Weiss. All in favor? 3-0. So we can look forward to that at the next meeting. Now I would like to have an approval of the minutes, a motion to approve the minutes from the reorganizational meeting of July 10th, 2019. Mrs. Weiss, seconded by Mrs. Mamalito. All in favor? 3-0. I'd like to have a motion to approve the minutes of the business meeting of July 10th, 2019. Mrs. Weiss, seconded by Mrs. Mamalito. All in favor? 3-0. And I would like to have a last motion to accept the minutes of the special meeting of August 5th, 2019. Mrs. Mamalito, seconded by Mrs. Weiss. All in favor? 3-0. Now we are up to the superintendent's report.
Hopefully that guy won't be long-winded. It has been a very productive summer. We are officially preparing for our summer to draw to a close. This has been a very, very busy time, as evidenced by the length of the personnel agenda that's been presented to the board for approval tonight. I would like to assure the board and the community that we are very much prepared for the return of students. Our facilities, our buildings, our grounds look immaculate. There are some wonderful additions that our students will witness upon return. Our students will also enjoy 4 buildings with new roofs, so the rain will be kept on the outside for the duration of our school year. The next few days before the students arrive, our teachers have returned. There's a good deal of work taking place preparing our classrooms for their arrival, and it's nice to see some of the faces we did not see in July, in the month of August. We have also been working very hard to prepare for Superintendent's Conference Day, which is of course the Tuesday after Labor Day, September 3rd, the day prior to our students. Dr. Hall and the curriculum team really take a strong hold of making sure that meaningful professional development is planned, and that our teachers not only have the opportunity to engage with one another, but are given, hopefully, some directions and some things that will help to inspire a productive year. So I just wanted to provide the board with a copy of the Superintendent's Conference Day agenda, and it'll take you through everything planned for the day, which will begin with a meeting in the middle school auditorium with all faculty and staff members. Every member of the district personnel will join us in the middle school auditorium. And please note the air conditioning has not yet been replaced as the bond calls for, so we're hoping for a cool day on September 3rd. And Mrs. Marcus, as the newly sworn president, will be addressing the faculty along with some president leaders on my side. So we are ready for the students to return and anxious to see them. One of the other items that we've worked on over the summer was preparing for all of our subsequent board meetings. And this document was shared in draft form with the board once before, but this is an updated copy of the presentation schedule that we'll be following throughout the school year. We like to plan in advance to make sure that we're covering a diverse group of topics and areas that might be of interest to both the board and the community. So this will be hopefully not in draft form and posted to our website and other areas within our parent groups and such. And if any member of the board present tonight has any questions about it or any additions or revisions you'd like to see, please get those to me at your earliest convenience, and I will assess the other two board members as well. Thus concludes my brief report.
It was so brief you caught me off guard. Whoa. Now we have residents' remarks. We do have a few residents, even though my three favorite ones have left the building. The board encourages all residents to attend its meetings, and this section of the agenda affords them the opportunity to speak. Persons wishing to speak should identify themselves and any organization they represent at the meeting. Comments related to district business or any agenda item should be kept as brief as possible and may not exceed 3 minutes. Questions or comments concerning matters which are not on the agenda will be taken under consideration and may be discontinued by the president. Public discussion of matters relating to staff, students, or others at which the reputations, privacy, or the right to due process could in some way be violated is prohibited. Do we have any residents that would like to make a remark? Come on up.
Hi, my name is Agapi Bell. I'm speaking for myself and no one else. First, I had planned to come. Hello? Oh, I had planned to come tonight because to follow up on what we were discussing in the spring about class sizes. But as I was reading the minutes and realizing this week what was happening, I just want to tell you, I think you should rest assured, I think in this like extraordinary circumstance, what you have, the person you're appointing is, I feel like you've done a good job with filling in that tremendous gap that's gonna happen. So I personally feel confident in your decision-making that you've done for yourselves and for the children. What I wanted to follow up with is the class sizes. What I don't know how to ask, like everything is what we discussed in the spring, like 25 or under, or are there still tweaking?
Yes, please.
Well, Mrs. Bell, I'm glad you asked. We spent all summer monitoring our enrollment very carefully. And one of the commitments I made to the committee, and you specifically, as you raised the question, at our budget hearing, was that if any of our elementary sections were to exceed 26, we would not begin the year at that number. So 2 weeks ago, and we looked at the enrollment of targeted grade levels weekly. 2 weeks ago, the 5th grade at Boyd was maxed out at 26 students in each of the 6 sections. So I had to make a decision at that time whether I was willing to risk that there would be no additional 5th graders added before school began, or if anyone would move out. So as I cannot predict a 2-week or 3-week period of time, I made the decision at that time to recommend to the board adding a 7th section of 5th grade. That personnel action is on tonight's agenda. the class has already been created. As I stated in the spring, Dr. Toscano prepared the 5th grade as both 6 and 7 sections. So when student placement letters went out earlier this week, it was with 7 sections of classes in the 5th grade. That brings class size down from 26 to 22 and a half. So all of our sections, K6, are beginning the year well below the 26 threshold. There is no one that will be above 25.
6th grade too.
Including 6th grade. The 6th grade section, keep in mind the students travel. So there's nothing above 26, but there are some classes that will be 26 for a portion of the day. But that same group of students that's 26 for math might be 22 for science, using that as an example. But there's no 6th grade section running at greater than 26, and the average is actually 24.25. So we're happy with that. As I cautioned the board and the community at the time of the budget, it does make our budget tight. We were hoping to stay away from adding contingency positions over the summer to have additional flexibility during the school year. We now have very limited flexibility. So when the master schedules are in place at both the middle school and the high school, and it's determined that, well, if we had an additional 0.2 or 0.4, we would have been able to have these children be able to take this elective or slide this AP class. We're very limited in our ability to do those things that we typically will do. So we have some flexibility. We were fortunate to have some personnel changes where some folks that were at the top of our pay scale moved on to other positions in other districts, and we replaced them with starting salaries. So we did get some additional flexibility there, but we will be limited. But to answer your question directly, we have kept our commitment made in the spring to class size, and the action that most directly impacted that was adding a 5th grade section at 4.
Thank you. Can I have a follow-up question? Sure. While I was looking through the documents online this week, I did notice a lot of the new appointments are 0.6, 0.4, 0.2, so my concern is, I know that's a cost savings with benefits or whatever, it's like very titrated to our needs, but I'm just going to express my concern for the longevity of the people who are taking that, and will they obviously would probably want a full-time job at some point. My concern is the turnover of the teachers year to year, such as our chorus teacher who left after 1 year when she was reduced. So, I mean, I don't know what her circumstances are. I'm just voicing a concern that other parents and I have been discussing this week about the nervousness about the so many part-time teachers, especially in this building, the middle school, and the turnover and how that'll affect the special age of middle school.
Yeah, I share your concern, and it's valid. What I can tell you is that when we do hire part-time employees, teacher assistants, lead replacement teachers, we go through the same process to identify those individuals as we do our full-time probationary teachers. Multiple rounds of interviews, demonstration lessons, things of that nature. So we tend to identify and hire very quality individuals for those part-time roles. So much so that approximately 10 of them that we hired and appointed in July will not be starting with us in September because they were given full-time opportunities in other districts. So your assessment that these part-time positions tend to become a limited tenure for those individuals is accurate, but for us, it also gives us a quality group of teachers that are available to us should permanent full-time positions become available. It's really, Mrs. Bell, however, a double-edged sword. We're getting good people, but you're right in that unless we have full-time opportunities available to them, we'll likely lose them. But what we can't do in good conscience is to make full-time assignments when we only have part-time needs. It would be, from a financial standpoint, very foolish to hire a full-time math teacher when we only have 30% of an assignment for that person, as an example. So we do have part-timers. We'll continue to have part-timers, and I'm certain we'll continue to identify outstanding people to fill those positions. But will there be turnover? There likely will.
Just voicing the fear.
We
Thank you.
We share it.
Yeah.
We share it.
Thank you. Anyone else?
you. Can I have a motion to accept the consent agenda? Motion by Mrs. Mamalito, seconded by Mrs. Weiss. Questions or comments on anything within the consent agenda? Seeing no questions or comments, all in favor? 3-0.
As I mentioned earlier, there are 30 recommendations within the personnel agenda tonight, and many of those are to appoint new members of the Elwood School community, faculty and staff members. And for each of them, upon interviewing them, I indicated they need not attend the board meeting, and they have elected to take me up on that offer. But if they were watching from home, there would become a point in the meeting where I say to the camera, congratulations to those individuals waiting for board approval. You just received it, and welcome to the Elwood School community. One other item that the board took action on was the claims audit report, which is something that the board is required to do after this submitted for review. And I just wanted to ask Ms. Dunkel to make a short comment about that.
Thank you for the opportunity, Dr. Bossert. The only thing I have to say is that report is there were no findings for the July claims audit report. So I thank my staff for that. So thank you.
When something's good, we like to point it out. So when we have an audit report that has no recommendations, it means that everything is going very, very well within the business office.
Gotta catch up to where we are. Yes, policy. Can I have a motion to approve the first reading of the policy, which is the 8334, the use of district credit cards, and 8334R, which is the regulation for the use of district credit cards? Can I have a motion? Mrs. Weiss, can I have a second? Mrs. Manolito, questions or comments? On the credit card.
Let's just look at the policy. I think the question that two questions I had was really about when the auditors, if you keep going down further, a minimum of twice a year. I was wondering if we spoke to our internal auditors. Oops, I'm sorry. Oh, no,
Just start over.
Oh, no, the question I had was, it says the internal claims auditor shall periodically, but no less than twice a year, monitor the use of credit card and report any serious problems, blah, blah, to superintendent schools. I was just curious if we could find out what is the norm. To me, it should be a little bit more than maybe on a quarterly basis, or a little bit more than, I know it says no less than twice a year, just maybe it was, could be more specific. Thank you. Can't talk with these invisible lines. And the second question I had in that was just about the limit. I know it's a credit line, so now I think I kind of mistook it for a charge at first of $7,500 and $10,000 for Home Depot, but that is the credit line. So that is within the fee schedule. So it would be like the 30 days, right? The credit line. So if you're at day number 29 and you're at $9,999, you can only do a one-day charge, correct? It's within that. Okay, so that clarifies that part.
I have a question. I'm trying to pull up the policy because I just got online, but I do know it in my head. The question, thank you. One of the main changes to this policy is that our current policy does not allow the issuance of a credit card to a district employee. And this revision includes, eliminates that, so we could authorize, issue a credit card to a district employee. Can you, Dr. Bossert, or Mrs. Dunkel, explain why that change is in our proposed policy?
Sure. One of the things that I had spoken to the board about, there are a number of occasions that arise during the school year where a credit card is required for different purchases that you can't make with a purchase order or requisition. Most of that involves conference attendance, travel, things of that nature. So in order to engage in these activities, I have been using my personal credit card, as I informed the board. There are two reasons why that was not a practice we sought to continue. Number one, the school district is a tax exempt entity, whereas I personally am not. So anytime we used my credit card in order to facilitate reservations, things like that, we were forced to pay tax. I individually absorbed that cost, which I know was not something that the board wanted to see continue. The other issue is that, as many of you, when you use your personal credit card, you receive some type of personal benefit, like air miles or things of that nature. It's not comfortable being reimbursed for expenses that came with it, an additional benefit. So for the community's knowledge, I approached the board to say this is not a practice I'm comfortable with. And Ms. Dunkel engaged in discussions with our auditors to make sure that a system was put into place to have an appropriate credit card use policy and appropriate practice to engage into. So when these rare circumstances arise during the year where a credit card must be used, it's a credit card that's appropriately issued to the district with an appropriate review process for any expenses that may be incurred on that credit line. The district clerk will likely be using that credit card on behalf of myself and the Board of Education more frequently than anyone else. It's something that stays locked in a drawer, and that's something that is carried on anyone's person, and is something that is only used on rare occasions that are indicated in policy and regulation and New York State law of appropriate expenses that the district can enter into on my behalf.
I just wanted to make note that this credit card policy has always been in place. We're just making some fine tweaks to it to include the superintendent's use of that credit card and language about credit lines not to exceed. So this is not a new policy, this has always existed, we're just giving permission for Dr. Bossert to have use of that additional credit card.
And I'm looking forward to giving Ms. Ginelli permission to use that card on my behalf.
I do have one comment under the regulation, under the bank credit card, which is some of the new portion of the revised policy, where it says that this card may only be used by the superintendent or designee for the purpose of travel, conferences, meals, and other necessary district-related expense. I know it is the regulation, so it is not the policy. It is just how the policy will be carried out in the district, and that can be changed fluidly by administration. But my suggestion, because designee can be vague, and this would be something going forward. I know you and I spoke, and it is really, Mary Lou, it is the district clerk is the designee. And I would like the language to shift to that specific role, to have it the superintendent or the district clerk. Because I think that takes away any ambiguity, and it's a safety for the district going forward. My suggestion.
I mean,
If I may, I don't have any objection to making that change now, because that is what the practice would be. So if the board is comfortable with identifying who that designee is, the district clerk, I have no problem changing regulations to reflect.
I think any time we're using policy or regulation, as specific as we can be, is always going to be beneficial.
should you be adding then Lorraine on in the instance that you don't know?
Well, it's always under the jurisdiction of
Oh.
assistant
Okay.
superintendent of business.
The jurisdiction does lie under my purview as assistant superintendent of business, but you will very rarely, if never, see the assistant superintendent of business position owning their own credit card, because very often they are the purchasing agent, and so it would be a conflict of interest.
Mhm.
I have no issue assigning the district clerk
Yeah.
and putting that language, nobody's specific, which is district. Yeah, you got it right.
Mhm.
Type.
Then we'll be happy to make that change, because that will be reflective of our practice.
Okay, any more questions or comments? Again, this is just the first read of this policy.
How often is the internal claims auditor checking through other things? Because Debbie was asking about, periodically, but no less than twice a year. So can it just be part of their regular practice? It says internal claims auditor shall periodically, but no less than twice a year, monitor the use of the credit card.
Well, the internal claims auditor, they review on a monthly basis all of the check warrants, which would include any claims or expenses that were being requested via reimbursement. So any purchase that was made using the credit card, once the invoice is received, it would be reviewed at that time. So it's really going to be happening on a monthly basis.
Okay. So do we just change that language?
Sure, we can do that also.
Yeah.
Any more questions or comments on the first read of the credit card policy and regulation? Okay, seeing none. All in favor? 3-0 on the first read. Now I'm going to go back to the wellness policy. I'd like to have a motion to adopt the amended wellness policy. Mrs. Mamalito, seconded by Mrs. Weiss. Questions or comments?
I just have a question for Dr. Bossert. We spent many months, a year plus on this. The last meeting, we asked the staff members throughout the school district to see how their year went with this. And so after feedback, we then again revisited this. One of the most important things that I want to make sure is happening is we expressed, with respect to allergies, a lot of it has to do with education and awareness. So we can put out this policy and it's going to get buried in a pile, or it's on a website up somewhere, and nobody really knows what's in it unless you're specifically looking for it. So we can try to keep everybody as safe as possible and implement these things, but the biggest thing to me is education, awareness, and have it done on a yearly basis. So we had asked Mr. Shanahan to implement a procedure where in every gym period, within the first few weeks of school, that they review the signs, the symptoms of anaphylaxis and prevention and so on and so forth. So I just want to make sure going forward that we're going to start that this year. And is that something that we put in policy and regulation, or is it just part of your responsibility and curriculum to make sure that happens?
Yeah, it's just included in best practice curriculum planning. It wouldn't be a matter of policy that's going to be instructed in the classroom. But yes, I spoke to Mr. Shanahan to be sure that that commitment is honored when school begins. I think I heard you correctly, but what you meant to say was that this topic will be covered in each physical education or health section, not in every meeting of the health representative.
Yes.
So each student will be exposed to this portion of our curriculum. And I will say, many of our policies do end up as part of our digital archives and don't get a lot of attention. Because there had been so much discussion about this policy and some question and ambiguity throughout last year, what has happened is that Mr. Shannon put together a memo that summarizes the policy for all of our faculty and staff members so they know how to implement it with fidelity in their classrooms. We then thought it would be best, after hearing some concerns from some of our parent leaders, to create a similar one-page summary that can be distributed to parents to reflect on what our practices and procedures are in classrooms and the use of food, reflecting of the newly adopted policy. So that is something Mr. Shanahan is working to have in place by our open house nights, so that when parents are in for these conversations, K-12, they can have some better reflection of changes that have been made to district practices. The change that is being made tonight is a simple one. In the past, for the past year, teachers were required to have written permission from parents for students to participate in any activity that involved serving food. What we found in practice through our teachers is that sometimes a child without an allergy, a child with no health-related concerns would simply forget to have that form signed and would need to be excluded from the activity. So we tried to create a circumstance where we could prevent that from happening, and what the board has authorized to change to the policy is that the teacher may receive verbal consent from a parent or appointed guardian for the child to participate on the day of the event.
I have a concern about that. First, I want to say that Mrs. Mamalito has worked very hard as a chair for this Health and Wellness Committee this year, and the year prior, Mrs. Weiss was on that, and I'm the one that has never been on this committee. So I'm a Monday morning quarterback in this position. But my one concern when I was reading this for the first time this week was, are we allowing a teacher to get a phone call authorization for a child with an allergy to participate? Because I look at the liability type issues with this, and that we have no documentation if something were to happen with the allergy, with the child with the allergy. If it is a child with not an allergy who just happened to not send in their permission slip, I get that. But I have some concerns, and maybe that can be addressed with an idea that we could be assuming some liability, not getting documentation with a child, from a parent of a child with an allergy.
I will make a statement with district council present, and if Mr. Block elects to disagree with me, I would ask him to do so. The written permission slip does not release the district from any liability. It is there to increase safety and the knowledge of our parents and our teachers. If, with or without a signature on a form, if a child is exposed to an allergen and the parent chooses to litigate against the district, whether or not we have their signature on a form will be inconsequential.
Yeah, that's a fair statement, because you can't waive a potential injury, so that's accurate.
Thank you. That's why we bring it up. Okay, any more questions or comments? No. Okay, seeing none, all in favor? 3-0. Okay, we're up to our we're losing more residents, so they're not gonna remark.
My two favorite.
Yes, Mrs. Weiss's two favorites. So we're up to our second.
Let the rest of your children know.
Actually, it's probably supposed to know. Okay, so we are up to the second residents' remarks. We do still have residents. Does anyone intend on making a remark? Okay, I'm gonna read my spiel. The board encourages all residents to attend its meetings, and this section of the agenda affords them the opportunity to speak. Persons wishing to speak should identify themselves and any organization they represent at the meeting. Comments related to district business or any agenda item should be kept as brief as possible and may not exceed 3 minutes. Questions or comments concerning matters which are not on the agenda will be taken under consideration and may be discontinued by the president. Public discussion of matters relating to staff, students, or others at which their reputation's privacy or the right to due process could be in some way violated is prohibited.
I'm not even gonna speak that long. And I'm disappointed I'm not one of your favorite residents, but anyway. First of all, my best wishes to Julia Freed and her family. And certainly she's done incredible things for our district. I've worked with her on many things, so and best wishes to the board as they move forward in this situation. In regards to the credit card policy, I was on the school board when the Roslyn scandal broke, and then all started with credit cards. So my personal preference would not to be not to give you a credit card, but I understand your reasons, and it seems to have been thoroughly thought out with the board. What I would caution against, or I guess not a caution, but maybe a recommendation, with since the business official is your her direct superior, whatever, you may need to check with maybe our internal auditors as to if you have enough controls, sufficient controls, compensating controls, and possibly a little more segregation of duty issue related to that, especially where the district clerk will also be involved. So to just make sure we have enough segregation of duties so we have sufficient controls over things, not that I'm overly concerned at all. So, and I do agree with the internal claims auditor. Every month as they look at all of the warrants, they are supposed to be going through specifically every check and documentation, etc. You know, maybe what you do on a quarterly basis is maybe looking to specifically know that it does relate to, does comply with the policy, because when we do the claims audits, you're looking at, you know, did everything foot on the invoice, was the PO in place, was all you doing those kinds of things, and more ticking and tying versus a whole conceptual policy thing. So there might be, we could even have internal audit, maybe the internal, I want to say the external internal auditors, the internal auditors maybe at the end of the year or so do a review of, a quick review of the credit card payments and make sure it is in compliance with policy. Thank you.
Thank you.
Hi, I just have a question. So does this mean that everything in the agenda is approved? So the music department trip is approved? I missed the vote. Okay. Oh, that's everything. Okay, so that's happening. So my follow-up question is, yay, remind me. So why is that okay and the Spanish kids was no? I'm sorry, I remember in the spring, I just explained that to me again.
International.
Oh, that's the difference. So if they wanted to go, you know, I don't know. So if the,
Pennsylvania.
let's say the French club wants to go to Quebec. Oh, that's still international. I see. So that is the designation.
Don't ask me if they want to go to New Orleans, because I will not allow that either.
The French Quarter, no, that is just on upon your discretion. So if another group wanted to go somewhere within the United States,
Well, let's put it
They
this way, the board has to approve it,
right?
but it's not getting on the agenda without my
Correct.
recommendation.
Which makes complete sense. I was just wanted some clarification.
Okay, international is a line that I'm not going to cross.
I get it. That's fine. Okay, I just wanted some clarification when I saw that. I'm like, oh, yeah, okay.
Yeah, this is in place of their annual Disney trip. Mrs. Henson has identified another competition, another venue that she thinks will really be a wonderful experience for the students, particularly those who have already had the Disney experience. So they're just shifting from Florida to Virginia this year, which we think is great.
I do too. Thank you.
Any more residents' remarks? Think so? May I have a motion to adjourn this meeting? Mrs. Weiss, seconded by Mrs. Mamalito. All in favor? 3-0. Thank you.